Question time, Senator Hume.
Thank you, Madam President. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. Like my colleagues, I've been speaking to businesses across Australia about their experience of Labor's cost of living crisis on them and on their operations. Now, one business owner told me that the cost of supplies was increasing 30% week on week.
Interjections are disorderly.
Minister, what is this Labor government doing to alleviate this inflation on small businesses, and does she agree with her colleague, the Assistant Treasurer, that there will be hyperinflation?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam President. I welcome the opportunity to talk about Labor's economic plan to address the cost of living crisis that we inherited from a government that had wasted a decade, that had not dealt with the policy challenges, that they had their head in the sand and used the budget like it was money made available for the National Party. That's what we are fixing, and we accept that businesses are under a lot of pressure. They haven't had an energy policy for the last 10 years. 22 failed policies under your government when you were in power. That's what small business is saying to us. Yes, there are challenges, but we need to deal with them, and Labor's economic plan does exactly that. And in terms of dealing with the cost of living crisis, we have made submissions to the Fair Work Commission to make sure that working people, those on the minimum wage, actually get a decent pay rise. We've extended some of the pandemic payments that your mob had ended or were going to end, and we've kept them going. We will debate this week the climate change bill to put in place the regulatory and legislative framework
Minister,
to deal with the impacts.
Just a moment, Senator Hume. I'm running the Senate, thank you, and I will call senators when I'm good and ready. Thank you, Senator Hughes. Senator Hume.
Thank you, Madam President. Point of order. A minute into a 2-minute answer, and the minister hasn't answered a question about the effects of inflation on small businesses and specifically about the potential for hyperinflation.
Thank you, Senator Hume. I believe Senator Gallagher is being relevant. Senator Gallagher.
Thank you. And in response to the second part, the forecasts for inflation were detailed in the Treasurer's July update economic statement, but I am explaining to the Shadow Minister for Finance exactly what we are doing to put downward pressure on costs on businesses and households. I can go through it again. We've got childcare, we've got cheaper medicines coming in, we've got to bring forward of the training places to deal with the skills crisis that small business are also discussing with us after years of not dealing with workforce shortages and the skills training to make sure that young people and older workers actually have the skills that they need for the jobs of their future. They're just some of the things that we've done in 3 months as opposed to your 9 years of inaction.
Thank you, Senator Gallagher. Before I call Senator Hume, I remind those on my right that Senator Hume has the right to put her question in silence. I struggled to hear her question. Senator Hume, first supplementary.
Thank you, Madam President. And I remind the minister that, in fact, childcare, COVID payments and minimum wages are doing nothing to help small business inflation. Another small business owner told me that she had begun absorbing fixed costs because with the other cost of living pressures, she didn't think that customers would be able to afford any additional price increases. So, Minister, what do you have to tell this business that will assist them in making sure that they can stay open and that they can stay profitable? And does she agree with her colleague, the Assistant Treasurer, that there will be more strikes?
Thank you, Senator Hume. Minister.
There was a lot in that question. As the Prime Minister has said, this government is pro-business. We are pro-working with business to deal with the challenges that they are dealing with right now after a decade of—
Minister Gallagher, please resume your seat. Minister Gallagher, please continue.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, President. After dealing with a decade of wasted opportunity and inaction by those opposite that have the nerve to come in here now and start blaming us for the economic challenges that we have inherited. These didn't happen overnight. They didn't happen on the 21st of May. They've been brewing for years. Skills, climate change, energy policy, dealing with the challenges in visa backlogs, in migration, all of the issues that we are responding to now after your government had its head in the sand because you were too busy fighting each other or throwing dodgy cash for the National Party.
Thank you, Ministers. Senator Hume, second supplementary.
Thank you, Madam President. I've also had a small business, in fact more than one, tell me that they're currently working through plans to lower hours for staff in expectation of an economic downturn. What does this minister have to tell these businesses who see no plan from this government? And does she agree? And does she agree with her colleague, the Assistant Treasurer, who said that under a Labor government there would be a very rocky economic period?
Thank you, Senator Hume. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, Madam President. Well, I can assure the Shadow Finance Minister that we will be working closely with small business. They were at the table at the Jobs and Skills Summit. They were deeply involved in the discussions through their peak organisations.
Minister, please resume your seat. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, President. We were working with small business and their industry representatives, and business was very well represented at the Jobs and Skills Summit. So we will be dealing with the things that they want to see dealt with, like skills, like increasing the migration numbers, like dealing with climate change, like putting in place an energy policy, by supporting them in terms of some of the challenges around cyber and digital. These are all the issues that we're looking with, and we want to ensure that people using their businesses have enough money in their pocket to go and spend in those businesses, and that's why we are supporting reasonable and responsible wage increases for working people.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Marielle Smith.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister for Finance and the Minister for Women, Senator Gallagher. Can the Minister update the Senate on the outcomes of last week's Jobs and Skills Summit and how those outcomes will benefit Australians?
Minister.
Thank you. I thank Senator Smith for the question and for her all the work that she did in the lead up to the Jobs and Skills Summit. Right across the government, our caucus, more than 100 roundtables were held in various locations. I did one with Senator Urquhart in northern Tasmania to listen, very well represented, more than 70 people, businesses, NGOs, everyone coming together to work with us to talk about the challenges that they want to see. The summit brought people together to agree key actions to build the stronger economy that we all want to see and help set a clear direction for future work. Putting full employment and productivity, remember that word, productivity, you didn't see much of it, did you, when you were in government, at the centre of our economic strategy, and recognising that equal participation and opportunities for women are critical to that. We agreed 36 immediate initiatives, including extra money for fee-free TAFE and fast-tracking of those fee-free places, more and better investment in social and affordable housing, an extra $4,000 income credit so aged pensioners can work more and earn more before it affects their pension, responsibly increasing the permanent migration target to address those crippling labour shortages that small business is telling us about, beginning the work to repair the broken bargaining system and strengthening flexible working arrangements. After a decade of division and delay, conflict and complacency, this is what can be achieved by a government that is inclusive, collaborative and consensus-seeking. By refusing to participate, not one of you attended. Mr Littleproud did, all credit to him. It's clear that the opposition wants nothing but a decade of flat real wages, falling productivity and falling living standards.
Senator McGrath. Senator Marielle Smith, first supplementary.
Can the minister outline the areas of policy that were discussed at the Jobs and Skills Summit and update the Senate on where there was broad agreement among those who were represented at the summit?
Minister.
I will, and I can tell you from being in that summit for 2 days how many people spoke to me about the environment. Sorry.
Order.
Thank you,
Minister.
President. I can't tell you how many people who attended the summit came up to me and said how refreshing it was that they had a government who was prepared to sit down with them for 2 days and talk to them about all of the issues affecting them. It was a broad range of people right across the community, and they wanted a better skilled and better trained workforce, addressing skill shortages and strengthening the migration system, boosting job security and wages, promoting equal opportunities and reducing barriers to employment, and maximising jobs and opportunities in our industry and our community. This is what the summit determined to be the priorities, as was making gender equality a core economic priority. There were significant agreements reached. It's a shame those opposite couldn't be bothered coming.
Senator Marielle Smith, second supplementary.
Thank you. Can the minister explain what progress was made at the Jobs and Skills Summit on restoring national leadership on gender equality?
Minister.
Thank you. I can. And this was a very serious part of the summit. It was kicked off by an all-women panel on equal opportunity and pay in a room where women made up a majority of participants. At the 1983 Economic Summit, there was only one woman in the room, Labor Senator Susan Ryan. But we know that women's equality is good economic policy, something that was recognised unanimously at the Jobs and Skills Summit. We also talked about our $5 billion commitment to make childcare cheaper for more Australian parents and allow more women to work more hours if they wished. We announced the chair of the Women's Economic Equality Task Force, Sam Mostyn, to maintain momentum on the ideas raised at the summit and advise the government on the national gender equality strategy. And I said, and I committed to, as Minister for the Public Service, to expect that the APS should take a leadership position on gender equality, including through reporting to WGEA, setting targets to address gender equality and gathering data on how to make flexible work.
Senator Cash.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations, Senator Watt. Why is the Albanese government entertaining the proposal of the Australian Council of Trade Unions to reintroduce industry-wide bargaining? Does the minister realise that industry-wide bargaining will lead to more strikes and significantly disrupt a number of sectors of our economy?
Thank you, Senator Cash. Minister.
Thank you, President. Well, isn't it disappointing, President, that the only group in Australian politics who hasn't got the memo that what the Australian people want is more cooperation is the Liberal Party? Even the National Party seemed to briefly get the memo when they had their leader turn up to the Jobs and Skills Summit. But of course, the leader of the opposition didn't turn up. The Shadow Treasurer wanted to be invited and then didn't show up. The Deputy Leader—
Watt, please resume your seat. Please continue, Minister Watt.
Thank you. As I say, President, it's very disappointing that the Liberal Party has not received the memo, because what the Australian people have been saying over and over again, both before and since the election, is what they want in industrial relations is more agreements and less conflict. But what do we continue to see offered up by the opposition, who are still fighting the last war? They want to progress the 9 years that we saw of more conflict, less agreements, lower wages and lower productivity. What a quadrella that is. If you could go to the races and make a bet on a quadrella and you were a member of the opposition, you would want more conflict, less agreement, lower wages and lower productivity. That is what you bequeathed the Australian people, and that is what you continue to want to offer the Australian people. Now, in terms of wage bargaining, the Albanese Labor government has made a very clear commitment that we will get wages moving in this country, and the way we are going to do that is by reaching more agreements. Business and unions agree that we need a new approach. That's why so many of them actually turned up to the summit, unlike anyone up until about that row last week, to actually have a discussion.
Please resume your seat. Those on my left particularly, and some senators in particular, Senator Hughes and McGrath, the running commentary is absolutely disorderly, and I would have asked you to desist. Please continue, Minister.
Thank you, President. So we will legislate to ensure that workers and businesses have flexible options for reaching agreements, and that is all about bringing the current legislation up to date with a new government that wants to get wages moving. Now, Senator Cash referenced the ACTU. Of course, the ACTU aren't the only people to welcome this approach. I heard Alexi Boyd from Cosboa this morning on the radio. What we are hearing from our members is some of them are saying this is something they would like to look into.
Thank you,
it's
Minister
as simple
Watt.
as that.
Your time has expired. Senator Cash, first supplementary.
Thank you. A supplementary question. Will the minister guarantee that any changes the Albanese government makes to the Fair Work Act will not result in more strike action being taken?
Thank you, Senator Cash. Minister.
Thank you, President. Well, as I say, this change, which has been agreed upon by businesses and unions at the summit, is about better pay for workers, particularly for women. It's about more productivity in the economy, not less. It's about more agreements rather than continuation of the 9 years of conflict that we saw from the last government
Watt,
that did nothing.
Your seat. Senator McGrath, I did ask you during the last series of questions to not do the running commentary. I would ask you to stop doing the running commentary, please. Minister.
Thank you, President. So what will change as a result of these legislative changes from this government is that more businesses will have access to simple, flexible and fair agreements, and more workers will get pay rises. So as I say, that's why Alexi Boyd from Cosboa was on the radio this morning saying that what she's hearing from her members is that some of them say it's something that's worth looking into. Unfortunately, the party that presents itself as being the friend of small business is actually running against small business and not listening to small business.
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator Birmingham.
Thank you, President. Point of order on question of direct relevance. Senator Cash's supplementary question went very specifically to the rates of strike action that could occur under government reforms, simply seeking a guarantee from Senator Watt that there would not be an increase in the incidence of strike action. He hasn't mentioned strike action once in his response. With 12 seconds remaining, President, I invite him to give that guarantee.
Thank you, Senator Birmingham. I do believe the minister's being relevant, but I will listen over the next 12 seconds. Minister.
Thank you, President. Unfortunately, there remain in this community and in this parliament some people who don't want workers to get pay rises, and there are some people who don't want businesses to have productivity, so that's why they keep using scare tactics about strikes.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Cash, second supplementary.
Thank you very much. Does the minister agree with the Assistant Treasurer that striking is an effective part of the bargaining process? Why is the government promoting workplace conflict instead of employees and employers working together?
Thank you, Senator Cash. Minister.
Well, thank you, President. Thank you, Senator Cash. The minister responsible for more conflict in industrial relations than any we have seen in recent history, the minister whose office leaked a police raid on a union office, that's how much she was into conflict, and now she wants to come in and lecture us about strikes and about industrial conflict. I mean, really. Even for you, that is utterly shameless. Everyone knows—
Minister, please resume your seat. Please continue.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Cash. I welcome every question you ask about industrial relations. Now, I noticed that there was one member of the opposition who did have the decency to admit that his government had been so failed, and that is the man who is now apparently known as Soccer Dad Matt Canavan, who on Twitter a couple of days ago said that when Australia became a nation in 1901, the average Australian had to work for 18 minutes to earn a loaf of bread. By 2019, that loaf cost just 4 minutes of work. Over the past 3 years, we have gone backwards. Thank you, Senator Canavan, for telling people that it now takes 4 minutes and 21 seconds to earn your daily bread as a result of your government.
Senator Faruqi.
My question is to Minister Wong, representing the Prime Minister. Minister, the recent climate-fuelled floods in Pakistan are having horrific consequences. To date, 1/3 of Pakistan is underwater, 33 million affected. The death toll is more than 1,000 people. 1 million homes have been wiped out, and 500,000 people are living in tents. This is the deadly face of the climate catastrophe. Early estimates show that the damage from the floods is more than $10 billion. The UN has called for $160 million in emergency aid. Australia has so far promised a measly $2 million in aid to Pakistan. Just $2 million. This is nowhere near our fair share. Minister, will the government take responsibility and provide more aid to Pakistan, commensurate with our wealth and contribution to the climate crisis, and equivalent to the scale of the disaster?
Minister.
Thank you, President, and I thank the Senator for her question, and I also acknowledge her and her family's personal connection with Pakistan, along with many others in the diaspora for whom this has been a very difficult time. The Senator is right. This is a disaster on a truly massive scale. 33 million people affected, including through displacement and loss of livelihood. We've seen lives lost, including those of children. And on behalf of the Australian Government, as I did last week, I extend our sympathies and condolences to the families and communities in Pakistan that have lost loved ones, and to the many who have been affected by the devastating floods. We announced a contribution, as the Senator has indicated, through the World Food Programme of $2 million to assist the Pakistani government and its people respond to immediate humanitarian needs, particularly focusing on those who are disproportionately affected, including women, children and the vulnerable. In relation to the request, I would make a few points. The first is Australia will consider further support in consultation with international partners following the launch of the UN Flash Appeal. It is the case that our initial response is on par with many other medium-sized donors. To be frank, there are humanitarian demands around the world, including in our near region, and just as we would always like to be able to fund many of the good ideas that were discussed at the Job Summit, so too when it comes to humanitarian aid, I always have, and my ministers in the portfolio always have more requests.
Thank you, Minister. Your time has expired. Senator Faruqi, first supplementary.
The people of Pakistan, Minister, are paying the price for the insatiable appetite of wealthy colonial countries like Australia to keep digging up coal, gas and oil. This obsession is leading to these deadly consequences. Given the death and disaster this is inflicting on the people in Pakistan and the global south, who did little to contribute to the climate crisis but are the most vulnerable, will the government now act urgently and commit to no new coal and gas?
Minister.
First, there was much in that question with which I don't necessarily agree, but I do agree with the proposition that those who are most vulnerable in this world are most vulnerable to climate change. And so where you already have poverty, where you already have poor levels of infrastructure, poor levels of economic resilience, then those communities and those nations are far more vulnerable to climate change and far less able to respond. I would make the point, as I made when I had the privilege of being Australia's Climate Minister, that pointing the finger at each other when it comes to resolving the global action on climate change was less productive than finding agreement about how we start to reduce emissions. The Senator is right that the vast majority of emissions already in the atmosphere are as a result of developed countries. I would make the point going forward. Thank you,
Minister. Your time has expired. Senator Faruqi, second supplementary.
Minister, we owe it to the people of Pakistan and all others who are on the front line, suffering the worst consequences of the climate crisis, to do everything we can to tackle it. We need fast action on methane to keep a 1.5 degrees centigrade future within reach. Will the government today commit to joining and signing on to the global pledge to cut methane emissions by 30% by 2030?
Thank you, Senator. Minister.
I agree. The government agrees that we need urgent action, and it is a pity that this country has spent nearly a decade fighting the climate wars, which have come at the cost both of jobs and opportunities here in Australia, but also have meant we have not been part of the solution when it comes to global action on climate. And in that context, I am disappointed to see some commentary from the Greens party that the climate wars aren't over. And what I would say to you is that I think Australians have made it clear they actually want a way forward. They want solutions. And whether it's those opposite or, on occasion, those at this end of the chamber, they seem to be more interested in the political benefits of conflict.
Oh, sorry, Senator Faruqi, you weren't in my line of sight.
Yeah, no, that's all right. I just want to go to relevance. More than half the time has expired. I had a very specific question about whether the government would commit to joining the global pledge to cut methane emissions.
Senator Faruqi, the minister is entitled to take into account the preamble and the question, and I do believe that the minister, you did have a broad preamble, I do believe that the minister's being relevant. Minister.
Thank you. There was quite a long preamble to which I think I am entitled to respond. I think we have made public our consideration of the methane issue that you have raised. But I would make the broader point that what we can do is make sure that we get over the climate wars we've seen over the last 10 years.
Thank you, Minister. Your time has expired. Senator Ciccone.
Thank you very much, President. My question is to the Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry, Senator Watt. Last week's Jobs and Skills Summit, held right here in Parliament House, brought together industry groups, business leaders, unions and advocacy groups to address workforce issues right across Australia. Can the Minister please detail to the Senate how the outcomes from this summit will benefit the ag industry right now?
Minister Watt.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Ciccone for another great question about agriculture and industry I know he's very interested in. Firstly, I just want to echo the words of the Prime Minister, who said in relation to the summit that it delivered outcomes that even he could not have hoped for. To see the leaders of groups, divided for so long under the previous coalition government, come together to discuss these major workforce and training issues was really something special, and that was certainly the mood of the room. And that applies to agriculture as much as to other industries. The National Farmers Federation and its members were in the same room as unions covering agricultural workers for the first time in many years, and I thank all of those participants for their collaboration and for putting the interests of industry, farmers and workers first rather than political games. And there were some great outcomes from the summit that will benefit the agriculture sector straight away. The government announced an additional $1 billion in joint funding with the states for fee-free TAFE in 2023, and I'll be working with industry, unions and rural Australia to ensure that agriculture gets its fair share. We also announced that the migration cap would be lifted from 165,000 to 195,000, including 34,000 places for the regions, an increase of 9,000 on that the previous government put in place. And again, this increase will help some of the gaps in agricultural's workforce. The government also announced money for visa processing to speed that up and clear the backlog of nearly 1 million people who are waiting because of the previous government's inaction, and again that will help in the agriculture workforce. And these measures, of course, come on top of the government's existing commitments, including to expand the PALM scheme and strengthen worker protections. At the end of the summit last week, the NFF President Fiona Simpson said that they got sick of waiting for action under the previous government. The ag sector waited for a number of years for the ag visa, they waited for years for investment in training, they waited for years for any movement, and now we're already delivering after 107
days. Thank you, Minister. Senator Ciccone, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. That's wonderful news. Thank you, Minister. Can the Minister outline what measures from the summit will be implemented to alleviate these workforce issues in the agriculture industry over the next 12 months?
Minister.
Thank you, President, and thank you again, Senator Ciccone. In the lead-up to the summit, a historic meeting was held between agriculture and processing employers, unions and government. This was something the former government couldn't do and wouldn't do. Actually getting people in the same room to talk about shared challenges, something the previous government just would not bother even trying to do. And as a direct result of that meeting, we have established a tripartite agriculture workforce working group to progress an agreed list of items needing further consideration. During the Jobs and Skills Summit, the NFF, Australian Pork Limited, Wool Producers Australia, JBS and the Australian Meat Industry Council joined the ACTU, the AWU, UWU and the Meat Workers Union at a signing ceremony to try and find agreement on these issues moving forward. This group will pursue solutions to better skill, attract, protect and retain workers across the ag sector. Having these different sectors who were once so divided come together was a fantastic step forward in dealing with these issues.
Thank you, Minister. Your time has expired. Senator Ciccone, second supplementary.
Thank you very much, President. And what great spirit of cooperation there was during the Jobs Summit last week. And I want to thank the Minister. Can the Minister also advise the Senate how this new spirit of cooperation compares to the previous approach undertaken by the coalition government.
Oh, sorry, Minister.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Ciccone, for observing the spirit of cooperation. It sounds like some others could learn from that. One of the things that was mentioned during the press conference that we held,
Order.
a press conference that we held with the NFF, its members and every union that covers the agriculture workforce, one of the things that was mentioned was how unlikely this tripartite working group would have been under the previous government. And it's no surprise when you have the leader of the National Party, who says he represents farmers, consistently hurling insults at the nation's peak farming body. Previously, he claimed that they don't represent farmers, they're only the peak body for farmers. He's called them ignorant, and just last week he called them cowards. No wonder the former government, with an attitude like that, couldn't deliver a single worker under their agriculture visa scheme. They couldn't get consensus within their own coalition, let alone within the wider sector. It's just more of the same from the Liberals and Nationals, dividing Australians instead of bringing them together. But I will give Mr Littleproud credit for turning up, because who wasn't there? The one person who wasn't there was the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Dutton.
Thank you, Minister Watt. Your time has expired. Senator Roberts.
And it's for Senator Gallagher for the Minister for Health. A peer-reviewed paper last week in the establishment scientific journal Vaccine examined Pfizer's COVID vaccine randomised phase 3 clinical trials data. It used the World Health Organisation's framework made for this purpose, the Brighton Collaboration on Adverse Events of Special Interest. Authors include virology and pharmacology experts from UCLA, Stanford, University of Baltimore and Queensland's Bond University. The paper concluded that Pfizer's vaccine was associated with a 36% increase in serious adverse events. The most common were coagulation disorders and acute cardiac injury. In every 10,000 people injected, 18 will experience a life-threatening or altering medical complication. Serious adverse events from Pfizer's COVID vaccine are 4 times higher than any benefit in reduced hospitalisation. Minister, is Pfizer's vaccine safe, and do you advise Australians to continue taking it?
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. And I must say I haven't read the paper that Senator Roberts is citing from, but in answer to his question, are the vaccines safe? Yes, they are. They have prevented, the successful deployment of vaccinations across the world have prevented probably millions of deaths from COVID-19, particularly in those vulnerable populations, older people, people who have a disability or are immunocompromised. And we've done very well here in Australia. We've got some more to do in terms of 4th doses, where it's only still, I think, about 40% of eligible people have received their 4th dose. But the vaccine is safe. It's been an incredibly effective health measure to manage the pandemic, to protect lives and to protect economic loss that would have otherwise occurred from such a serious global pandemic. And I think we have put our trust in the health experts in Australia from the beginning of this pandemic. Their advice hasn't changed. ATAGI, who have considered all of the matters, the scientific panel that have looked at them, the TGA, who has approved the vaccines, they have been through rigorous processes to ensure that they are safe. And where there have been adverse events, and there have been, unfortunately, including serious adverse events from the loss of life, the advice has changed and the vaccine program was changed to deal with that. And where there have been adverse events, they have all been reported publicly on the TGA website so that people are able to see the data and see the changing health advice around the vaccines. But yes, they are safe and people should have their vaccine, including their 4th dose.
Thank you, Minister. Your time has expired. Senator Roberts, first supplementary.
63 million COVID injections means up to 113,000 Australians suffered serious adverse events. Since the vaccine's release, all-cause mortality after allowing for COVID deaths is at record highs. This paper proves COVID vaccines cause serious side effects, in 13 cases fatal. The TGA admits children are being given myocarditis and pericarditis. Minister, where's the Royal Commission that your own COVID committee called for?
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. Well, we didn't call for a Royal Commission into the in vaccine safety. So let's be clear on that. As chair, there was a recommendation about looking at all aspects of the pandemic response, but it is different, and I don't want to be involved in any conspiracy about vaccines. Thanks very much. They are safe. The evidence has been provided. The data is available on the website. And I would say to Senator Roberts, because I do have time for you, Senator Roberts, we have good discussions and have had through the pandemic, is if you are concerned by this paper you have read, I would urge you to refer it to the TGA or to the AHPPC or to ATAGI and get their considered opinion on it to see whether there are, to see and perhaps listen to the other side of those experts who've been working on vaccine and vaccine safety.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Roberts, second supplementary.
The vaccines are causing coagulation disorders, and this will show in a reduction in live births. The Australian Bureau of Statistics receives live birth data 6 weeks post-death, so we should be seeing 6 weeks post-birth. So we should be seeing live birth data to June 2022. Yet the ABS data stops at December 2020. Minister, why is this government holding back 2.5 years of live birth data? What are you covering up?
Minister.
Well, we're not covering up anything for a start, so just to answer your question directly. Secondly, on issues of births, live births, maternal deaths or deaths of babies, usually that data is reported, and it's reported at state and territory level, so I'm sure that data does exist if you are interested in it. Where there have been side effects from the vaccine, and there have been some, I'm sure many in this chamber got them, headaches, feeling a bit tired and escalating into more serious conditions, they have been appropriately managed and advised on by all of those experts. So when there was some concerns about blood clotting and myocarditis in young men, I think in teenage boys particularly, those issues were addressed and were managed, including by providing advice to anyone who is a vaccination provider to keep an eye out for any conditions like that. And you'll see from the data that the TGA...
Thank you, Minister.
Sorry,
your time has expired. Senator McDonald.
My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Northern Australia, Senator Watt. During the inquiry into the government's climate change bills, the Northern Australia Infrastructure Facility indicated there are a total of 8 coal and gas-related opportunities within the project pipeline. Can the Minister guarantee the continuation of these projects?
Thank you, Senator. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President. As the former Shadow Minister for Northern Australia, I don't require a folder for this answer, but I thank you for the questions, Senator McDonald. I think it's well understood that the Labor Party's position in relation to any resource project, coal, gas or any other mineral, is that we assess it on its merits. We do not have the same position of the Greens, which is a blanket ban. We do not have the position of the opposition, which is to support every single project without having a look at the environmental or economic benefits of it. We have a sensible approach. So our position is very simple. If a particular project stacks up economically, environmentally and socially, then it will go ahead. Every project will go through the proper assessment proposals. Every project has to stack up economically. Every project has to pass the environmental tests and get the environmental approvals. So the projects that you're talking about are hypothetical in nature at this point in time, but should those projects be applied for, then we'll consider them on their merits.
Thank you, Minister. First supplementary, Senator McDonald.
Can the Minister outline how the proposed bill will affect the future investment decisions by NAIF, considering the government's commitment to increasing gas supply?
Thank you, Senator. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator McDonald. Again, the position being put forward by this bill, this historic bill, from this government is that what we will do for the first time is lock in an interim emissions target of 43% by 2030. It's a real target. It doesn't rely on technology that has yet to be invented, and that is, of course, a pathway to net zero by 2050. And I might say to Senator McDonald and other members of the opposition that these targets are targets that are already committed to by pretty much every resources company in the country. Every resources in the country that you care to think about has committed to net zero by 2050. They are all already making changes to reduce their emissions, and frankly, what this government is doing is actually just trying to catch up with where industry is on the way to then leading. It's something that unfortunately the former government didn't do. We saw industry get well ahead of the former government's policy, and all that did was deprive regional Australians of jobs.
Thank you, Minister. Your time has expired. Senator McDonald, second supplementary.
Thank you. That didn't answer my last question at all. Can the minister guarantee that no proposed or committed gas projects currently within NAV's pipeline will be refused financing as a result of changes under the legislation?
Minister Watt.
Thank you, President. I've seen no evidence whatsoever that this government intends to change NAF's investment mandate or rules in the way Senator McDonald is talking about. Sorry?
No. Senator Mackenzie, that is disorderly. Minister.
Thank you, President. As the Minister representing the Northern Australia Minister, I have seen no evidence to speak of. Thank you, Senator Green, for reminding me. The only government that we have seen interfere with the NAF's investment decisions about investing in resources and energy projects is the former government, which killed off a wind farm outside Cairns, the Caban project that would have delivered about 250 jobs to Cairns.
Oh, sorry, Senator McDonald.
A point of order. I specifically asked about the
just a moment, Senator McDonald. Senator Green, I would ask you, if that was you, to desist. Thank you, Senator McDonald.
I specifically asked about the projects within the NAF pipeline to be refused funding as a result of changes under this legislation.
Thank you, Senator. Yes, thank you, Senator McDonald, and I do believe the minister is being relevant. Please continue, Minister.
Thank you, President. Again, what the climate change bill is about bringing in an interim target to reduce our emissions. There is nothing in the bill that I'm aware of that would have the effect that Senator McDonald is talking about, and I would certainly hope that she and her colleagues are not intending to continue the same scare tactics that we saw for 10 years that held back investment, drove up our emissions and cost jobs.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Rice.
Minister Gallagher. Minister, the Treasurer was quoted this morning in relation to the indexation of income support payments as saying, "We know that it won't solve every problem for everybody, but it's important that we try and make sure that those payments keep up, and that we acknowledge that times will still be tough for a lot of people." Minister, today's indexation of income support payments is less than $2 a day extra for someone on job seeker. This pathetic increase will leave millions of Australians in really tough times, with payments that are not keeping up, that aren't within cooey of the poverty line, let alone giving people enough to live on. Minister, poverty is a political choice. Why won't your government choose to increase the rate of job seeker above the poverty line?
Thank you, Senator Rice. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President, and I thank Senator Rice for the question. It's on an important topic and one which the government has been looking at closely in terms of, when we've been working through our line-by-line audit of those opposites' budget and how they used to allocate money to see how we can make sure that every dollar that is being spent is actually quality spending and going to supporting Australia and the Australian people. We've been clear, though, about the rate of job seeker. This did come up quite a number of times during the election campaign, and our commitment was to look at payments through the budget process and to look at basically how much money is available and ease cost of living where we can. But we didn't make a commitment to increase job seeker over and above the indexation arrangements, which, because of the high inflation, it will be a very, very significant adjustment to the parameters in the October budget, which the budget will have to accommodate as well. I mean, part of the issue we're dealing with here is $1 trillion of Liberal debt, deficits for as far as the eye can see. We do need to be fiscally responsible as well. And they are the challenges facing us as we put together our first budget. We cannot just go and increase or fund all of the good ideas that we would like to fund because we've inherited an absolute mess from those opposite. Significant budgets, $1 trillion in debt, programs growing, terminating
Senator
measures
McGrath.
that have no funding beyond the next 2 years. These are the challenges that we're trying to grapple with. But rest assured, we will do a better job and we will care about people much more than those people
Minister.
opposite
The time
did.
has expired. Senator Rice, first supplementary.
Thanks, Minister. Minister, you talk about spending every dollar in a quality way, of the $1 trillion of Liberal debt, of being fiscally responsible. And I repeat, poverty is a political choice. Can you explain then why you are choosing to implement the Stage 3 tax cuts, which will give $244 billion over the next 10 years to billionaires and the ultra-wealthy and to everybody in this place, while people on JobSeeker are forced to live below the poverty line?
Thank you, Senator Rice. Minister Gallagher.
So the priority for the government is actually doing what we can now in the immediate term to deal with the budget mess we've got and deal with the cost of living pressures Australians are facing. We have not changed our view on Stage 3 tax cuts. They don't come in until July 2024. There is an immediate issue here right now that we are working through. And believe me, we are working hard every day to go through the budget to try and make room for good ideas that we would like to fund over and above the commitments we made in the election campaign. But in terms of putting immediate cost of living relief, they will be things that we do within the October budget, like making medicines cheaper, like making the investments in cheaper childcare, and the quite significant parameter variations that we'll have on indexing payments, which will make a difference for people who are living on those payments.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Rice, second supplementary.
Thanks, President. Minister, I'll ask it another way. Can you explain why people living below the poverty line are going to receive a measly $1.84 a day, while Labor's Stage 3 tax cuts will give Clive Palmer and everybody earning over $200,000 an extra $24.86 a day?
Thank you, Senator Rice. Minister Gallagher.
Well, my answer is the same as the previous question, which is that we are focused right now on the next 2 years and what we can do to deal with some of these cost of living pressures immediately. The indexation increases to payments will flow through the adjustment made at the end of September. So they will provide some assistance to people as we put in place other arrangements to deal with cost of living, such as our childcare policy and such as our cheaper medicines that we will also do. In terms of Stage 3, we haven't changed our view on that, but that is not until 2024. These issues that people are dealing with right now are right now, and that's our focus as we put together the October budget.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Walsh.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Social Services, Senator Farrell. What is the Minister doing to help Australian pensioners deal with the lack of action and neglect of cost of living issues that is the legacy of the Morrison government?
Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and thank Senator Walsh for her question and congratulate her on the terrific job she's continuing to do for the people of Victoria. The Albanese Labor government has overseen the largest indexation increases to government payment in the history of more than 30 years of Australian government allowances. For Australian pensioners, they haven't seen a rise like this in over 12 years, over the entire length of the former cold-hearted Liberal National Coalition government that now sits opposite because the Australian people simply had enough. Enough of the lack of economic planning to lead us out of the pandemic. Enough of the lazy policy that has left our nation's most disadvantaged the most exposed to the tumultuous global economic conditions. This government is committed to serving all Australians and ensuring that no matter what your circumstances, there is a strong social safety net to protect you when you need it most. This reflects the fundamental principles of this government to leave no one behind and hold no one back. This indexation will be yet another building block that we are putting in place to help ordinary Australians manage in challenging economic times that we face, ensuring the government payments keep up with the cost of living. Madam President, our government understands the challenges Australian households are facing with increasing cost of living pressures, especially those on low incomes. The measure to increase government payments by 4% demonstrates yet again how we are committed to a welfare system that supports the most vulnerable Australians, encourage those who are able to work or study and remain sustainable for future generations.
Has expired. Senator Walsh, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. Minister, is the indexation measure the only boost that aged pensioners can expect from this government?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam President. And again, I thank the senator for her very important question. Indexation is not the only measure our government has announced in order to assist pensioners. As discussed in the chamber this morning, following the Albanese's Albanese government's Jobs and Skills Summit, we announced an increase in the amount pensioners will be able to earn before losing any of their pension. From the 1st of December 2022, pensioners on the old age pension will have their work bonuses income bank credited with $4,000. This will take the maximum work bonus income bank from $7,800 to $11,800 until the 30th of June 2023. The $4,000 increase will be added to each age pensioner's work bonus income bank up front.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Walsh, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. Minister, what else is the government doing to address the cost of living pressures facing Australians?
Thank you, Senator Walsh. Minister.
Thank you, Madam President. Again, thank the senator for her question and her commitment to the most disadvantaged people in our community. The indexation measures announced will go some way to easing the cost of living burden facing Australia. And some of our society's most disadvantaged people are feeling that most keenly. These indexation measures have been implemented to address the CPI rate increase of 4%. The indexation will continue to be applied on a 6-monthly basis. The factors causing price increases are multifaceted, and we must work to address them across budget cycles. We're spending around $126 billion on income support payments through the Social Security and Social Services portfolio, which encompass family assistance and student assistance payments in 2022 and 2023.
Thank you, Minister. Your time has expired. Senator McLaughlin.
President, my question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Industry and Science, Senator Farrell. Is the Minister aware of reports today that the Space Industry Association of Australia is asserting that there has been no substantial engagement with the space industry by any ministerial office in Canberra, that the space policy is in a vacuum, that the critical national space infrastructure projects totalling $2.5 billion are stalled on departmental desks, and it appears to many that space has fallen through the cracks in Canberra? And can the Minister reconcile his government's reported neglect of Australia's strategic and economic importance, space industry, with the government's stated commitment to the industry sector?
Thank you, Senator McLaughlin. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, Madam President, and I thank the senator for his question. We're certainly not letting space fall between the cracks, and you ought to know better than that, coming from South Australia, Senator.
That's right.
You know all about what the Malinowskis government is doing in South Australia and what the Albanese government is doing nationally on this issue. We're revitalising the space industry, which for 10 years under your former government was left to wallow. Now, you ought to know, Senator, exactly what's going on. For instance, in Port Lincoln in South Australia is going to be the basis for further space exploration, further launches of rockets into space. Now, I was recently in the United States, and I met with a company that's looking at Port Lincoln to build a new space station. And the idea of this space station, you'll like this. It's a centrifuge. It's a centrifuge, and this spins round and round and round and fires a rocket up into space. And instead of costing,
Minister Farrell, please resume your seat. Order. I'm waiting for the Senate to settle down before I call the Minister. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, Madam President. And it fires a rocket up into space. And instead of costing about $2 million per rocket launch, that costs about $250,000. So it's going to significantly reduce.
Thank you, Minister. Your time has expired. Senator McLaughlin, first supplementary.
Thank you, President, and I thank the Minister for his very comprehensive answer. And can I ask him, arising from that answer, explain the Space Industry Association of Australia's revelation that no space industry representative was invited to the government's Job and Skills Summit last week, despite the sector employing more than 10,000 workers and contributing billions to the national economy?
Thank you, Senator McLaughlin. Order. Order. Minister.
Well, I can't quite work out the Senator's line of questioning here. Either this government is doing something about the space industry and therefore creating all those jobs, or it's not. But you can't have it both ways, with due respect, Senator. The reality is, as a young man, I can remember rockets being fired at Woomera in South Australia. You let that entire industry go. You let that entire industry...
Minister, thank you. Senator Birmingham.
I hate to do it, Madam President, but a point of order on direct relevance is, as much as the trips down Senator Farrell's memory lane are most entertaining for the chamber, there was a question from Senator McLaughlin which did go particularly to why the government did not invite representatives of the space industry to the Jobs and Skills Summit, and I find it hard to understand how Senator Farrell's recollections of what was happening at Woomera when he was a young man have any bearing whatsoever on the invite list for the Jobs and Skills Summit.
Thank you, Senator Birmingham. When there's quiet in the chamber, I will address your point of order. I will redirect Senator Farrell to the question, which was specifically about the Jobs and Skills Summit. Thank you, Minister.
With due respect, President, I thought I'd answered that directly in my first sentence. That didn't make any sense for what the senator was asking. Look, the fact of the matter is that the Jobs and Skills Summit that we held last week and that Senator Gallagher had a very significant contribution involved a whole range.
Thank you, Minister. Your time has expired. Senator McLaughlin, second supplementary.
Western Australian.
Order.
Minister, as you be aware, the government is yet to respond to the inquiry of the other place into the developing Australia's space industry, which reported in December. And can he please advise the chamber when we will receive a response to that report?
Thank you, Senator McLaughlin. Senator Farrell, Minister.
Well, let me tell you, and I'll reiterate what I started my comments with these questions about. the Malinowskis government in South Australia, very fine man, Mr. Malinowskis, and the Albanese government at the federal level will ensure that the space industry flourishes in this country. We're all about bringing industry back to Australia. You let it go. Do you remember about Holden's? What you did to Holden's in South Australia? What you did to Mitsubishi? Oh, that was a long time ago, but...
Minister, please resume your seat. Order. Senator McGrath. I'm sorry. When those on my left are quiet, I will ask Senator Birmingham for his point of order. Thank you, Senator Birmingham.
President, again, a point of order on direct relevance. We seem to be on the rather earthly matters of cars at present from Senator Farrell, rather than, of course, the actual question that relates to the space industry and the jobs from the space industry.
Thank you, Senator Birmingham. I do note Senator Farrell was just getting started, but I'm sure he will get to the directness of that question. Minister. We're waiting. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President. We intend to rebuild manufacturing in this country. You kicked all of these companies out of our country. We're bringing them back, and space is going to be an absolutely vital part of that.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Wong.
I ask that further questions be placed on notice.